Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that I'm a profound skeptic about the term post-truth, which somehow suggests that in previous ages the truth flowed like crystal spring water from the mouth of Walter Cronkite or Richard Nixon. There has never been a golden age of truth. What we're talking about is a shift in the media landscape which makes it less clear to us who is saying what on behalf of whom. And it's not clear, this is my second introductory point, that that shift is by any means all to the bad. I commend to all of you the digital news report of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford, and it argues with really serious research behind this that actually, because people have so many different sources of news, they look at social media, but they also look at identifiable online sites, and they still look at television and radio, they're actually receiving a better, more diverse, and in some ways more reliable diet of news than maybe we were 20 years ago when there were just 3 major terrestrial TV channels in the US. So I think that's an important cautionary note. Now, coming to fake news itself is an incredibly elusive term. As used by Donald Trump in his tweets, it means stuff I don't like. The New York Times reports Russian influence in the Trump campaign. Fake news. So as used by Donald Trump, the charge of fake news is itself fake news. Then there is simply rubbish. 95% of what is out there online is just rubbish. Ringo Starr ate my hamster. And we all ignore it, and ignore it we should. I say in my book on free speech, the internet is the largest sewer in human history. It's not clear to me that's fake news that we're talking about. Then there is something which is getting more seriously towards fake news, which is misinformation and disinformation. I distinguish between the two as follows. Misinformation is false information circulated for commercial or other reasons. Disinformation is false information circulated maliciously for specifically political reasons. So the former is a bunch of kids sitting in a town in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, as I'm careful to call it here in Greece, or as we call it, if I may be allowed to say so, Macedonian meme farms, who are spreading fake news simply to make money from the digital advertising. Disinformation is the agencies in Russia at Putin's behest, spreading stories such as that the Pope supported the candidacy of Donald Trump in the presidential election. And this is serious stuff, and it's serious because of the lack of transparency on the major platforms, so that US voters in the last election did not know whether this was actually paid content, dark posts, political advertising, where it came from at all, and because the algorithms on the major platforms ensure, and this is quite well established, that false information, whether mis or dis, is as likely to go viral as accurate information, because the algorithms privilege engagement. People share sexy and exciting stories, whether it's Ringo Starr ate my hamster or the Pope is backing Donald Trump, and so it has an outsized, a magnified impact. Roughly 80,000 votes in a couple of swing states swung the US presidential election. Nobody will ever know what actually swung those 20,000 votes, but in that context, this is very serious. But then there is something which is much more widespread, which is very partisan, polarized, highly distorted spin, as you would get it from Fox News on the one side or from MSNBC on the other. That's not exactly fake news, but I would argue it's an even more serious threat. I would think that actually in swinging the last US election, Fox News was more important than fake news. And playing into that is the crisis of the business model of so-called legacy media of most newspapers, because Facebook and Google are eating their digital advertising lunch. Most existing newspapers are drowning. What do you do when you're drowning? You wave and you shout. So struggling newspapers are all waving and shouting. They've become much more sensationalist, celebrity stories, and more partisan, because that gets the clicks and the click stream. So all of these do feed into a real problem, which is a problem also about the disappearance of a shared public sphere as everybody goes off into their own little echo chambers. Okay, what is to be done? I think there are actually quite a lot of things that can be done. One should not despair at all. Let me mention a few of them just to kick off the conversation. First of all, more transparency from the platforms. They alone know what is going on. By the way, even they only often know after the event. I can tell you, Facebook didn't know in advance the Russian money that was going to those political ads. They found out afterwards. But more transparency from the platforms. Transparency about advertisements, more transparency about algorithms. Then there is what I call food labeling for content. So what really has changed is that 20 years ago, it may have been rubbish that you were eating, but you knew it was rubbish because it was labeled as such. If you think of information as being like food, we had food labeling for content. Now, and again, the Reuters Institute have done studies on this, they ask people, you saw this story on Facebook, do you know where it came from? What was the source? And most of them do not know. We did a study at Stanford which showed the same thing. So people simply do not know what they are eating online. And so I think food labeling for content is an important part of the answer. I think education is an important part of the answer, digital media literacy. If you have public service media like the BBC, hang on to them for dear life and double their funding. Because in this fragmented, polarized, sensationalized public sphere, they have the explicit mandate to preserve a classic public sphere as in ancient Athens, as on the Pnyx. Foundation funding for journalism, increasingly playing an important role. Serious investigative journalism, foreign reporting. You know, the slogan on The Guardian's comment pages is, comment is free, but facts are sacred. What we now say on The Guardian is comment is free, but facts are expensive, right? Because actually it's very expensive to do serious investigative reporting or foreign news. There's no reason why the business model of the newspaper, which almost by accident survived for a couple of 100 years, namely people paid for it and there was advertising, should be the way we fund the public good of news in the 21st century. Why not other forms of funding, including foundations? But of course, we also hope that newspapers will find the business model, and I look forward to hearing from our Greek colleagues how the Greek newspapers have found the business model, the hidden gold. My last point, and on this I want to dwell for a moment, is, I think, a really important point, which is regulation or self-regulation. So if I can step back for a moment and connect this to the last panel, which was about great power competition. What I've argued in my book, Free Speech, is that we have a global power struggle going on over our heads for the rules of the game in the whole world of information and communications, including free speech online. And there are three great norm setters: China, Europe, and the United States. Now, China has a clear model which Xi Jinping calls information sovereignty, reasserting the territorial sovereignty and control of the state. In the year 2000, Bill Clinton said, for China to try to control the internet would be like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. And the Chinese Communist Party turned round and said, Bill, just watch us. And you know what? In the last 15 years, the Chinese Communist Party has made a pretty good stab at nailing Jell-O to the wall. I'm not going to say they will win in the long term, but in the short term, they have reasserted control. And the cyber-libertarian utopian hopes have been, in the short term, defeated. This model is increasingly finding traction in other parts of the world, partly because Chinese power is simply spreading in other parts of the world, so that Chinese investment in media in Africa and Latin America is enormously important, but also because against the extraterritoriality of the empire called Facebook, the American empire called Facebook or Google, to post-colonial countries, be they democracies or authoritarian regimes, be it Brazil and India as much as China and Russia, the idea that you can assert sovereignty, which is a very important value for all post-colonial countries, is very attractive. So make no mistake, the Chinese model is gaining enormous global traction. On the other side, you have the United States, the First Amendment tradition, net neutrality, no intermediary liability. You have a certain very pro-free speech model, and in the middle, you have the biggest multinational single market in the world, the European Union, which is increasingly going in the direction of regulation. And the classic example of this is the German Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz, to give it its snappier title, the German Facebook law, which is, in my view, extremely problematic because it is a state moving into the area of content regulation and incentivizing the platforms like Facebook, Google, Twitter, actually to take down more content than they might otherwise take down, because otherwise they'll be hit with a massive fine. So I think it's a really problematic model in itself. And by the way, Emmanuel Macron has now talked about having a law on fake news, but also it's music to the ears of Vladimir Putin. It is no accident that Putin immediately copied the NetzDG, the German law, in a Russian form. If Germany is doing it, why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't everybody else? So I think that is a very worrying precedent. But, and with this I finish, if, as I would like to, we are to make the case for self-regulation rather than the state interfering with political speech, and in a sense asking us to adjudicate between what is true and what is false, which is a very dangerous precedent, then the platforms have to do a hell of a lot better job than they have done so far. And they have actually to demonstrate that self-regulation can address the very real problems of harassment, of hate speech, and of fake news. Thank you.